Apparently I'm live. Okay, I've had trouble technically. So I'm Peter Crawford Valentino, and what I wanted to talk to you about today is at first 9/11 and the idea of 9/11. Now, 9/11 is sheer fantasy, the way it was sold to us as Americans. The 9/11 Commission was sheer fantasy. The whole concept of it from beginning to end is a fantasy that we live within. And just simple things about it, like Building 7 going down by itself, nothing hitting it. But in the American mind, or the American aesthetic, that's okay. We can't explain it, but we went off and killed millions of people regardless. And that's what I want to get to today in terms of our ability to just live in a fantasy. A fantasy that happened before that is the death of our president, President Kennedy. And so there was this fantasy that got put out by the Warren Commission that this man was able to shoot the president with this bullet that just zigzagged out, hit here, did that, turned around. And they somehow knew that America would buy into that incredible fantasy that Oswald acted alone. And then we've lived in that fantasy. It's also a fantasy of ours as American citizens that was not a coup d'etat. We didn't see a coup d'etat. Everything's just America, everything's fine. And then 9/11 is, to me, obviously a coup d'etat. Another form of government took over. We can see the Homeland Security, the Patriot Act coming in, and everything changing with 9/11. I happened to be in the Middle East in 2004 on a military, playing for the military on a tour as a musician. And I was talking to a cab driver in Egypt, and he said, oh, everything changed after 9/11. It was the big shift, and just after that day, everything moved. And if we really look at 9/11 and we're serious people, and we don't want to just live in a fantasy, then we can really get down to the bottom of who did it. And believe me, there is value in knowing who is doing something. It's not just them, because I heard the other day, I was talking about the Jesuits, and the word came, well, can't we just say them and not name people? And that is another version of this fantasy I'm talking about. We want to pretend that we don't know who did it. If you look at my film, Papa Mundi and the 9/11 Mechanism, you'll see that I declare and actually prove unequivocally through my work and other ancillary work after that film that the Knights of Malta did 9/11. It's a clear, open and shut case. And so many other people have looked at it, and we have an aggregate of open and shut cases on 9/11. And so to pretend that the Arabs did it and we have to go attack them and we have to have this war of terror, that's just, it becomes an Americanism that we're okay with just living in a fantasy. And for me, it's very difficult for me to do that. Yeah, when I was a kid, I wanted to believe in Santa Claus and have this fantasy and stuff like that. But when we grow up, we can see that it's detrimental to us to have a fantasy. It's like driving down the road blindfold. And if you're blindfolded, you can fantasize all you want, but you're going to hit something, and that's where we are as America right now. We're going to hit something if we don't wake up and stop living in a fantasy. In terms of speaking about California and the fantasy we live in here, we have those wildfires. People want to fantasize that houses just caught fire, the vegetation didn't, it's just wildfires. And it's just amazing to me that the news is able to foment these fantasies, and then we just buy into them. And that's another situation of somebody doing this act to us, some kind of military organization, some kind of organization. And if we stop thinking that it's just this wildfire and we stop having that fantasy, we can actually look into finding who did it. There's a trail. There's justice that can be had at the other end of that crime. But America wants to go on to the next fantasy. What's on TV? We watch 5 hours of TV a day. Now, I don't want to beat on America or Americans because I'm a true blue patriotic American. And I love occasional television shows, and I look at certain things, and I have my own dream world. But the American dream shouldn't just be a fantasy. If that's something that we share, the American dream, let's let it be something else besides just this fantasy that we were never attacked. Fantasy that everything's fine and that it's very normal for building 7s to just fall down. It's very normal for bullets to just go this way, and it's normal for wildfires to just catch onto houses and burn them up from the inside. So when are we going to stop? It will stop when we grow up and say, okay, somebody is doing these things. Somebody is putting chemtrails in the sky. The people who look up and say, well, I don't see a chemtrail. When you see planes going across the sky doing these zigzag things, and crosses and stuff, then if that's a fantasy, and it's amazing. And then they tell us who see the chemtrails, oh, that's a conspiracy theory, so that we're seeing things, so that we're the ones who are having a fantasy. Even though we're sitting there in groups going, okay, well, there's a plane going there. And the last time I experienced this was in the Los Angeles Veg Fest thing that we went to do some work on chemtrails. And it was kind of an amazing thing because the chemtrail planes were going crazy that day, and tons of stuff was in the sky. And it gets very hard to just live in your fantasy that there are no chemtrails when there are planes going across the sky, and you can try to have that fantasy that there are contrails or persistent contrails, which don't exist. But really, now what I want you to get is this. When I looked into 9/11, it was clearly the Knights of Malta who did it. Please look at that work and understand that's a reality. The Knights of Malta did 9/11, and they're tied to the Vatican. They are part of the Vatican and the military of that institution. So we can see that the Vatican did 9/11. As things progress in terms of Agenda 21, some people say Agenda 21 is just a fantasy. If you look up Agenda 21, there's going to be something that says Agenda 21 conspiracy theory. Even though they put out a book that's 350 pages and it exists as a book, it's a real book. I know because I did buy one from Amazon Prime. And it's just a fantasy to people. And how can you make something a fantasy that's already been created as a solid object? If I show it to you, okay, that's a solid object, it's not a fantasy. So then we know that the UN, it's not a fantasy that the UN wants to do this one world government and tell us everything that we should do. And then we have to look at the genesis of the UN. Okay, who are these people who are doing these things to us? And we have to then see, okay, the UN was created by the Council on Foreign Relations, tying to the Royal Institute of International Affairs in England, which ties to the Jesuits, which ties to the Vatican, and boom, there you have it again. So we could say, well, we don't know who this UN is. We could say, well, we don't know who's doing the chemtrails, but it can only be a military organization. It could either be the US, it could be NATO, or it could be the UN. But we have to see that it's somebody, and we start to trace it, and we find that the UN is behind it. They talk about all this depopulation stuff, and the people are coming out with new things. Oh yeah, chemtrails, we're gonna put them in the sky sometime in the future. And they let us fantasize. Everything in America has become just a false flag. And it's because we just have this predilection for Fantasies. It seems like you could play another false flag on us any day and we'd buy it. False flag after another. And the Jesuits, whom I credit with all this, with the creation of the UN, and they're certainly in charge of the Vatican, and our Pope, the Pope now is a Jesuit. These people must just wake up and have false flags for breakfast, and they just think, what is the next false flag we can do today? And then we as Americans just buy into it. So that I want you to understand that there is power in knowing who is attacking you. If you want it to just be this fantasy them, it's just them, you know, in quotes or italics, and then you just live in that dream world, there's no way to stop it. Because you can't stop the them italicizing quotes, you know, because where are they? But when I say that they're the Jesuit Vatican, they're in a place. When I say that it's the UN, they have this place, CFR, Council on Foreign Relations, that everybody has a place, and everybody is someplace. It's not just these ghost creatures, the Illuminati, you know, or the elite. All these ways of saying that we don't know who it is, that it's this amorphous thing, and we want to keep it that way. I don't. I don't, because I can see that living in truth is really the most important thing. I don't want to have a life that's a lie. You know, when I was a kid, I would live in various things, being an artist, being a musician. There's musicians and artists and actors have a tremendous fantasy world. And maybe I had enough of that, so at a certain point I said, okay, I just really want to see what is real in the world. And when my big brother died in Vietnam, I wanted to find out who killed him. And when Kennedy died, you know, before that I wanted to find out who killed Kennedy. I want to get to the bottom of things. There's some kind of Sherlock Holmes aspect. I read that, you know, everything that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle wrote on that subject, and I just have that snoop mind. I just want to know what happened. And so sometimes there are disparaging words that come to me from people who want to stay in the fantasy. And I just want to say to you now at the end of my message, please just know that there's power in waking up. Know that there's power in getting to the bottom of crimes like the wildfires in California. That's something that I really, really want to get to the bottom of. In terms of being a governor of this state, it's amazing to me that Jerry Brown just let that happen. And now we're moving into other people who are up for the governorship that are just going to give you the same old story. And I just want to be an incisive journalist and invite that with my peers, and just have us just look into things and decide that we can know and we can get to the bottom of things. And that is going to be better for us. We have to trust the truth, okay? There are two different things they say about the truth. They say the truth hurts, and that's why we want to live in a fantasy. The truth hurts, you know, just want to go back to Santa Claus and everything like that. But they also say that the truth will set you free. And as Americans, our system has been based on freedom, on individual freedom. So if it hurts to be free, then that's too bad. I think that it hurts to be a slave, or it hurts to be within a fascistic system. And that's what I want to avoid. So what we're going to do now as America is we're going to see who is attacking us, who has been attacking us over a period of time. And by being brave enough to actually look and see, we'll be able to get down to the bottom of it and solve the problem. I'm Peter Crawford Valentino. I am running for governor of California in 2018. I appreciate your vote. I'm a write-in candidate, and the election is on June 5th. And I hope you will join me in voting on that day. And that is another way to make things real in our country. Thank you very much. Take good care of yourselves.